So you just picked up that shiny new Ryzen 5 1500X? Or you're looking to pick one up and you're trying to figure out what kind of graphics card you should go with to pair with it for the best overall experience? Well, that is a fairly difficult question to answer, because in this price range, you're most likely going to be pairing it with a Polaris 10 or a GTX 1060 class Pascal card from NVIDIA. Now, for this comparison, we are using a reference XFX Radeon RX 488 GB with a slight overclock to 1288 MHz over the 1266 stock. Now, hold the phone, Keith. I know what you guys are thinking, but isn't the RX 580 out yet, and the 570? You guys just reviewed a 570, so why not use a 580? Well, quite frankly, we don't have a 580 in-house, and this being a reference model is a good baseline. Same thing goes for the NVIDIA GTX 1060. This is a Founders Edition of the 6GB model, and it will represent a good baseline for that particular card. So these are more or less starting points for these particular these graphics cards to see kind of how they perform up against each other. And yeah, so if you go for aftermarket overclocked variants, the performance will be higher on each card. So if you get an MSI RX 580, it's going to perform better than this 480, or an MSI GTX 1060, it's going to perform better than this 1060. So we want to give you a good foundation for kind of what to expect with both of them. And as we move into the actual comparisons on the games, you're going to notice that we don't actually put up graphs. What we're focusing here is more of the experiential factor here. So we've got the overlays from MSI Afterburner running, showing you frame rates, frame times, clock speed, temperatures, memory usage, as well as the core core utilization for the CPU, all the way up to 8 threads. So that's what we're focusing on here, rather than looking at just straight graphs. So let's go ahead and look over the system. Of course, we got the Ryzen 5 1500X running at stock. We're running it on the MSI X370 X-Power Gaming Titanium motherboard, just because that's the system that we run these in. We're using 16 gigabytes of Corsair Vengeance LPX DDR4 at 2933, because with a $190 CPU, I have a hard time anticipating somebody would spend $180 on 16 gigs of RAM to run it at 3200. 2933 is close enough, so there is that to consider. With that out of the way, let's jump into these comparisons. The first title we have up on the dock is For Honor, being run on the Ultimate preset. So the highest setting, the highest preset that the game did offer. So that's what we ran with both cards on here, and you can see they both perform fairly well. They're staying relatively well matched throughout. Now, this is an NVIDIA title, so I'm sure some people will be worth pointing that out, but as we go forward, you'll find we've got an even balance of both NVIDIA titles as well as AMD titles to try and balance the payload here, so to say. Up next is Deus Ex Mankind Divided. Now this was, again, just like the previous game, using the in-game benchmark, and we did run it under the DirectX 12 API. However, this game, rather than using the maximum preset, we used a high-level preset. So the high preset, DX12, full screen, the works, just to see how well these two cards line up against each other while using this particular CPU. Moving on to Ghost Recon Wildlands, a game that loves cores, loves threads, and loves clock speed. This was rather interesting how it ran between the two. Watching the CPU utilization was very interesting. Now this was a DX11 only game, so we only were able to run in that single API, but you can see here how well they perform along each other depending on which card you choose to go with. On to the next, we find Hitman, which has been a very interesting benchmark to be running for DirectX 12 because it has been one that heavily favored AMD cards in the past, but through recent updates from NVIDIA has shown extreme promise on their performance, especially with their Pascal lineup cards, which we took a look at those back earlier this year when they did release those. Shows quite competent comparison between the two, so it's interesting to see how things have progressed over time through driver development, which is something definitely to take in mind whenever you're making your decision.
Yeah, that's it. Oh, you know what I'm talking about.
If you'll excuse me, Congressman, urgent matter. Do enjoy your evening.
You, over there! I need you by the stage now! Lipstick there, do we? Make you look like unkempt sluts.
Oh, and here we go with probably one of the most controversial titles we'll put in here. There seems to be a lot of conflicting ideology on utilizing this game as a benchmark, but since we're not really throwing numbers out here and we aren't using the in-game benchmark, we wanted to show side-by-side comparison of how things go. So I guess if you're looking for a direct side-by-side comparison of a Ryzen CPU with an AMD and an NVIDIA GPU running this game in DirectX 12, well, here you go. There they are. Here they are running. So I'll let you guys make your own conclusions on this one. No other input from me. Thank you. And here we are to our last title. This is Ashes of the Singularity Escalation. With the updated patch, with the Ryzen patch, as a lot of people are referring to it as, version 2.2, this is, well, you know, arguably whether it's a game or a benchmark. I do know a few people who actually do play it, but looking at them side by side, you can see in a game that really does leverage CPU cores and definitely takes advantage of a lot of DirectX 12 features to see how well they perform. So as I said, as we're in the last game here, we're just going to wrap this video up here rather than having a full conclusion afterwards, so you can watch this extremely long benchmark play out. But what we wanted to show you guys was how each card performs on the CPU. This really isn't an RX 480 versus GTX 1060 video. That's why we didn't put hard numbers up at the end to show you a comparison. What we wanted to show you was how they work together. So on the left, you have the RX 480 8GB playing with the 1500X, and on the left or the right, you have the GTX 1060 6GB Founders Edition playing with the GTX or the Ryzen 5 1500X to see how the performance is based on which card you want to go with. Now, in all of these games, they were fairly close. Of course, every card could be overclocked, the CPU could be overclocked and increase the performance. However, this gives you a good baseline. This is going to be the minimum performance you can expect with a 480 and a 1500X and a GTX 1060 and a 480X. And that's the thing that we really wanted to show you guys, is what to expect if you were to pick up either one of these combinations. We're not really going to tell you which one to go with because, quite frankly, the performance is very similar across each one. So that's going to be something you have to take into mind, is do you like the features of, say, like the RX 480 has a lower cost of entry to something like FreeSync, whereas the GTX 1060 has an easier to use software ecosystem built into it. So something you guys have to consider, and you'd have to make up your mind on which one you'd want to go with. I'd love to hear your comments on this type of video, if you found this useful or informative whatsoever, and if you'd like to see more things like this in the future, something we'd like to definitely deliver to you guys as our audience. So feedback is appreciated, and this has been Keith with WCCF Tech TV, and we'll catch you in the next video, and as always, thank you so much.